Welcome to Let's Eat. I'm your host, Emily, holistic health coach and self-proclaimed wellness enthusiast, here to meet you at the intersection of physical and mental health, the exact location where optimal wellness lies. This podcast is meant to explore all areas of mind and body wellness, designed to offer you the integrative knowledge, behavioral strategies, and mindset shifts necessary to uplevel your health and feel better today. We'll explore nutrition, sleep, movement, self-care and stress management, habits and routines, gut health, mental health, and more. I am so happy that you're here. Welcome to the table. Let's eat. Hello, and welcome to the first official episode of Let's Eat. I am beyond excited that you're here, that you're tuning in. And I truly hope that every single time you tune in, you gain value, you take important information and strategies and tools and tips and insight away with you so that you're able to improve your health and wellness at the very least by 1%. Ultimately, that is my goal. I want this to be a space that is both informative, that is empowering, that is encouraging, and allows you to potentially see health and wellness through a different lens. So this lens is really the lens by which I see my own health and wellness, the lens through which I see the health and wellness of my clients, the lens through which I share on Instagram and TikTok and social media, and really how I step into the world of wellness, because we all know that the world of wellness is vast. It spans far and wide, and ultimately it can be exceptionally overwhelming and confusing and daunting. And unfortunately, this leads a lot of us to abandoning ship or tapping out entirely on how we see our wellness, on pursuing healing, on moving forward in terms of addressing certain symptoms or getting to the root cause of certain issues, whatever the case may be. And I really hope that through this platform, you are able to feel a little bit more empowered in taking the necessary steps in order to feel your best, to live your best quality life, and so forth. Now, my philosophy and my lens is rooted in the fact that our physical health is our mental health, and our mental health is our physical health. And if you are new here, or you're new to my platforms, then this will not be the last time you hear me say this. And if you are not new here and you know me, whether you've known me for a month, you've known me for a year, you've known me for many years, you know that this is how I operate. I believe that what happens in the body inevitably impacts our brain and our mind and our emotional wellness. And I also know that what's going on within our mind, our mindset, our beliefs, our thoughts, and so forth is going to impact what happens in the body physiologically, what happens in the body physically. And so it's imperative that we start to see our own health and wellness through this lens and start to create an understanding of the connection there so that we're able to step forward in a more productive way in taking the necessary steps to heal, to feel better, to live a better quality life, because we're examining the whole body, instead of looking at our parts and our organ systems and so forth in isolation, which is very much how Western medicine operates, and it's very much how we've culturally been led to believe is the approach to health that's most effective, right? So as you tune in week to week, and as you learn more about me and my philosophy and my work, I will always return to that home base. That will always be where anything that I share, anything that I am suggesting or recommending is going to always return back to the mind-body connection, to how our health truly exists at the intersection of our physical and mental health. And as we move along, I plan to really emphasize this point and expand and elaborate and really illustrate how this connection exists in our lives from day to day, because it's manifested in a multitude of different ways, and then also offer you strategies and tools and reflection opportunities to identify how it's relevant for you, how it shows up for you, what are your symptoms, what is going on in your personal health journey, and how might you begin to see your own health circumstances through this lens. Maybe it's the first time you've ever heard of this, maybe you've heard of it before but you don't know too much about it. Obviously, because I don't know you and your specific circumstances, I can only do so much in supporting you. But I hope to offer you lots of information so that you feel encouraged and you feel empowered to take those steps to really invest in learning more about your mind and about your body and how the two are connected. So to say I'm excited is an understatement. I am so thrilled that you're here. I look forward to supporting you, to informing you, to educating you and empowering you. And I welcome you to my table. Let's eat. So let us dive in. For today's episode, I really want to spend time introducing myself, sharing a little bit about my background, where I come from, my story, and really getting you the details of where I came from and how I got to where I am today. I feel like that is probably the best way for me to really kick off this podcast, is to share with you why I do this and why I am inspired and why I'm motivated to share on this podcast, why I have lived my life the way I've lived for the past several years, why I started my Instagram, where all that came from, why I left the mental health field, and really give you a good grasp on who I am and what I'm about. I think that all of our health stories are unique. All of our upbringings are, individual to our environment, our families, our socioeconomic status, our backgrounds, right? All of that. But I feel like giving you that initial understanding of what my experience has been like will hopefully allow you to feel some sort of connection to me and my story. And based on where I am now, I want to always emphasize that there's always room to grow, right? There's always room to expand, to improve, to heal. I am on my own health journey, as I have been for many years and will continue to be, especially moving into 2024. That is a big goal of mine, is to really tune in on a deeper level to my health in both a mental and a physical way. But I hope that I never come across as knowing it all. I hope I never come across as I am, in perfect health and that everything's wonderful. I have my days, right? Both mentally and physically. And I really want to keep it real. I want to keep it honest. I want to keep it transparent, and will always continue to ensure that that is coming across in every episode that I share. I'm also always open to questions, feedback, and episode requests, topic requests, if you feel that there's something that you are curious about or you want to know about me. There is a perpetual open invitation for you to reach out, whether it's over email or DMs, whatever it is. I love just talking and having conversation about these topics, but also if there's something more specific you're curious about, or a question you might have, or a topic you'd be interested in, I am all ears. I welcome that, and I hope that you always feel comfortable in doing so. My goal is for you to feel as though you have a seat at my kitchen table, which, full disclosure, I don't currently have a kitchen table. I moved into this space last year, and since then I've slowly accumulated different, furnishings and decor and so forth. But for the sake of right now, I just have a bar top with some bar stools. So we can imagine that you're at my kitchen table. One day I will have a kitchen table. But for right now, we're sitting at my bar top and we're having a meal, likely something that's fueling the body, fueling the mind, and fueling the soul. And we're having conversation about health, about wellness, whatever the topic may be. And from our conversation, while sharing a nourishing meal, you're feeling encouraged, you're feeling energized, you're feeling empowered to take these strategies and suggestions and insight to implement them into your own life so that you can feel better today, tomorrow, and for forever. So I grew up in a family of 6. I'm one of 4. I have 3 siblings. I have a sister and I have 2 brothers. And my older brother has been sick for his entire life and for as long as I can remember. He's a year older than me. And his experience absolutely shaped my childhood. It shaped the way I saw health growing up. And it obviously has influenced my whole entire life in a number of ways and continues to, as he's navigated his own medical and behavioral issues over the course of the past 30 years. Now, when it comes to my upbringing and my experience growing up as it relates to food and wellness and health and so forth was pretty average. I would say it's pretty traditional, very much the standard American family with the standard American diet. My dad actually owns his own produce company. He's going to be retiring this year after many, many years. And I get asked frequently, is there some sort of connection there? Are you, pursuing this line of work because you grew up in a household that was a produce family household? And honestly, no, not one bit. I did not step into this space until my, early 20s. And I'm so grateful that I did. But, it was a very bumpy road and a twisting and turning and winding road to get me here. I'll get into that, moving forward. But my recollection of nutrition and diet and exercise and so forth growing up was pretty minimal. I didn't play sports. I actually was in musical theater for many years. I tried to play sports, wasn't for me. My diet consisted of Pop-Tarts and deli meat sandwiches, and we'd get McDonald's maybe once or twice a week. It was very traditional. Lots of processed foods, lots of granola bars and chips and cakes and fruit roll-ups. And I was a sour cream, would love to put half and half in my hot chocolates and my Swiss Miss hot chocolates, right? It was a very traditional household in terms of the way that we ate. And I share this because I think it's important that, I emphasize how I grew up in a household that wasn't embedded with healthy eating, quote unquote, and, holistic practices and, wellness was not at the forefront. It was simply just an average childhood, maybe a little bit far from average considering my brother and his health and so forth. But there was really nothing unique about it as it relates to the field in which I'm in now and the belief system that I have around health and wellness as a whole. Something that I am also a very big believer in is how trauma impacts the body. Now, this is a further illustration of the mind-body connection, and learning more about adverse childhood experiences and really understanding how trauma in our childhoods and then even trauma throughout the course of our lives has a direct influence on our gut health, on our physical health, on our mental health for sure, and really making connections between your experiences and what you're experiencing now, or at the very least, your past experiences, and being real with yourself if that's an area that you need to explore, maybe with a licensed therapist or someone who's trained to do so, can make an enormous difference on, how you're feeling in the immediate term, but then also the potential for health outcomes in the future. And I share this because it's a very big and real part of my story, right? My brother's experience and his health and illness and so forth, that was very traumatic for my siblings, for my parents. I spent many years, elementary school into middle school, being bullied. That has 110% influenced who I am today. I see that play out in my friendships, my relationships. Something that is always going to be on the forefront of these conversations is the acknowledgement that we all have our own trauma, we all have our own stressors, and they are not isolated events that don't impact us. Trauma definitely falls on a spectrum, and I think a lot of times we think of trauma as being sexual abuse or neglect, things of that capacity, but there's also a lot of research behind traumas like living in a divorced household or bullying or anything of that nature that actually does make an enormous difference on our brain, on our bodies, and then can result in autoimmune in the future and other issues within our health. So I want to continue to shed light on that because it's an important topic of conversation. It's a further illustration of the mind-body connection. And it obviously was a big part of my life and my story as I navigated my childhood into my adolescence and so forth. Moving into high school, I definitely dealt with the standard experience of my body was changing, the comparison game, and social media definitely was not as widespread as it is today. This is maybe 2009 to 2013 that I was in high school. So luckily, social media was kind of just getting started. I know I started an Instagram maybe in high school. I don't even remember Snapchat. I know I had a Facebook, but social media definitely was not what it is now. And I think that definitely changed a lot in terms of, how we see technology and social media being such a prominent factor in the lives of, younger generations versus what it was for me, because it hadn't really permeated our generation as much, which I feel very lucky for, right? Because we see lots of issues coming from social media and technology and so forth, especially as it relates to body image and disordered eating and so forth. Like I mentioned, through elementary and middle school, I wasn't terribly active. My mom at this point in time taught spin classes at my local gym, so I would attend those periodically, but movement was just not something that I really cared about, didn't really need to invest in. I always was thinner. I have been tall my whole life. So, while I had my own issues with my body, I never felt compelled to move my body. Even in gym class, I just refused to change, because in high school we, go to the locker room and we change. I would just say, I'm not changing today, right? I would lose credit for the day. I just decided, no, not for me. So movement and exercise and all that, especially not being an athlete, didn't really become a priority of mine until after high school. Through high school, though, my diet and nutrition and so forth was pretty much the same as it was through elementary school and middle school. I was eating bagels every day. I was, eating McDonald's after school with my best friend. I love Big Macs. Okay, full disclosure, I love Big Macs. So, my best friend and I would drive to the local McDonald's after school. And this was, kind of the norm. This is how it went. It was my sophomore, junior year that I think I really started to want to become healthy. And by healthy, I mean I wanted to become thinner. And not in a disordered eating type of way necessarily, but there definitely became a push and pull when it came to my nutrition, where I was continuing to eat the foods that I really wanted to eat, right? The maybe lesser healthful foods. But then I was also trying to work out more. I had gotten a gym membership. I was, spending a lot of time doing a lot of cardio, definitely never touching a weight, right? But I was always on the elliptical or on the treadmill. And, I started to really understand maybe a little bit more about my body and, wanting to look and appear a certain way, as most 16, 17-year-olds do. There definitely were phases, especially around big events, like prom, for example, where I was very fixated on what I was eating. I was counting my calories. I was using my MyFitnessPal and these calorie trackers in order to keep an eye on how much I was eating, what I was eating. I was spending a lot of time doing a lot of cardio, like I mentioned. And this pattern of exercise and fluctuating yo-yo dieting and nutrition and so forth really ebbed and flowed for most of the remainder of high school into my late teens. I would fixate on a certain event, or maybe the summer. I've shared on this before where, March and Aprils would come. And there would be this March and April anxiety that would linger and loom because, the winter had unfolded the way it had. Maybe I didn't spend a lot of time focusing on my movement or on my nutrition. And now summer is near and I need to look a certain way. And it would continue every year, year after year. And I would never get to a place where I was happy, right? I would work hard. I'd try different cleanses. I remember my girlfriends and I did this one program. I forget what it's called, but, it was very intensive where we were eating certain things and we were, drinking certain drinks and taking certain supplements and exercising a certain way. And year after year, I would never be successful, nor would it be sustainable. And I think that is the clearest lesson that I learned from 16 to maybe 21, 22 is there was no sustainability in my nutrition nor in my movement. And that is one of the biggest takeaways that I have looking back in comparison to where I am now. I never focused on becoming healthier. I simply focused on becoming skinnier or looking a certain way. And so because that was my motivation, because that was my incentive, I never actually got to where I wanted to be. And I also was not able to sustain the lifestyle that I was leading. The goal of my work with clients is to create sustainability in their health and wellness practice. And if it's too intensive or requires a lot of caloric restriction or some sort of unmaintainable meal plan or dietary structure, or it's an extreme exercise protocol or regimen that's really intensive or requires a lot of you that can lead to burnout or injury, it's not going to be maintainable. It's not going to last for the long term, and you'll find yourself in this cycle, in this loop of success and then failure, success and then failure, and you'll never actually create a lifestyle. And ultimately, that is the goal. The goal is to create a lifestyle that works for you and your circumstances. And that is the difference between who I was then and where I am now. And a big difference between who I am now versus who I was then was back then I wasn't focused on my health. I wasn't worried about investing in my health for the immediate term and the long term. And I can't really hold that against myself because I was 16, 17, 18 years old. And unless I have health issues to be concerned about, which I'm very grateful that I didn't have to worry about my health, or at least I didn't realize I needed to worry about my health, I was really just focused on, what do I look like? What am I going to look like in a bathing suit this summer? And how do I get to a place where I feel most comfortable in that? And that was really all I cared about at that time. Now, I'm sure over the course of this time as well, this is all building up to what ended up taking place in my early 20s, early to mid 20s, which had to do with symptoms of underlying issues. Something I didn't mention about my childhood was antibiotic use and medication use was not something that was unfamiliar in my household. It's not to say that, we took medication with every stomach ache or headache or whatever the case is, but it was pretty commonplace to have Tylenol, to have Advil, to go on antibiotics. I was diagnosed with Lyme's disease in second grade. I ended up missing quite a bit of second grade and almost was held back. And I also was someone who dealt with frequent bladder infections as a child as well. So these are two areas of my health that, one might look at and say, oh, that was a part of your childhood. That has no significance on who you are now. But what we know about our history is the foods that we ate, the toxins we were exposed to, the medications we took, the stress we endured, and so forth really do shape who you are today. So in retrospect, I look at how my diet looked, my lack of movement, the trauma and stress that I experienced, the illnesses that I, suffered from, the medication use and so forth. And that is going to help me better understand where I am now and who I am today. Now, this is not traditional of Western medicine, right? Western medicine is going to see you for 8 to 12 minutes. They are more focused on what your symptoms are and a strategy to take care of said symptoms. So you might leave with a prescription, you might leave with a suggestion, and you're on your way. Versus a more functional medicine, a more holistic wellness approach, you would then consider how are all of these past experiences influencing the development of the disease that you're experiencing now. And while that might be a much more intensive, much more extensive process, it really does allow you to understand the trajectory of the development of this issue and then gives you an opportunity to address those individual experiences in a way that's going to eradicate the root of the issue as opposed to just treating the symptoms and the manifestation of the issue that's taking place. As I said before, these experiences and our lives don't happen in isolation. So without addressing the antibiotic use, without addressing the stress and the trauma and so forth, we have to be aware of how they could still be influencing who I am now, even though it happened when I was 6, 7, 8 years old. We have to be cognizant of that influence so that we can then take the necessary steps now in order to heal and feel better. Now, my mental health journey and my experience of depression and anxiety didn't really start until my late teens. And it was during this time that I was going through some life transitions. I was going to college. I ended up transferring just because it wasn't right for me. And it was during this time that I was prescribed Prozac. I was 18 going on 19. And I saw a psychiatrist for a brief period of time. decided that the Prozac was not for me. I wasn't taking it consistently. It was negatively interacting with my drinking, which at the time I was drinking a lot more because I was in college. And of course, given the circumstances that I was navigating, this influenced how I was feeling emotionally, but it definitely did not help that I was not physically healthy. I was eating a lot at this point in time because I was going through a hard time. I was using food as a coping mechanism, so I was gaining weight. I wasn't exercising, and I generally was just not taking care of myself. Looking back, I know that, obviously as an 18, 19-year-old young woman, that was a very hard time for me. And the last thing that I would want to do is exercise, is take care of myself, is, invest in some of these practices that I know inevitably impact my mental health. But I wish I could have hugged myself at that age, right? And given myself the tools that I know to be true, that I know to be helpful, to better navigate the circumstances in a more healthful, more productive way. Through proper nutrition, through movement, through mindfulness and journaling and deep breathing, through proper sleep, having proper sleep hygiene, all of these strategies that are very physical health focused have an enormous impact on how we feel emotionally. This is not to say that depression and anxiety isn't also very real outside of these components. But consideration of these influences prior to reaching for medication can actually forego the need for medication as a whole. Now, I do believe that there is a time and place for medication. I would never suggest that medication should not be utilized when it comes to mental health, but I do believe there's an overdependence on it. And if we were to invest a bit more in our lifestyle, I think from a mental health perspective, not only would our rates of depression and anxiety decrease, but our overall quality of life would improve significantly. Since then, that was when I was 19 and 20 years old, my experience with depression and anxiety has ebbed and flowed. Anxiety is still something that I navigate to this day, but I definitely have a better grasp on how to handle it based on nervous system support, my gut health, how to take care of myself, especially as it relates to exercise and mental health, supplementation, and so forth. A further illustration of the mind-body connection is how we take care of ourselves in a physical capacity has an influence on how we feel emotionally, how we feel mentally. And it's really unfortunate because I don't feel that this is embedded enough in the work of the mental health field. I think oftentimes we resort quickly to medication, or we focus entirely on cognitive work, which in both respects there's efficacy and there's importance. But for your sake and for your experience, I encourage you to really reflect on how are you? How are you feeling? What's going on with you emotionally and mentally? And what are some areas in terms of lifestyle, like nutrition, sleep, your gut health, mindset, nervous system support, and so forth, that will actually allow you to feel better in an emotional capacity? And I want to spend more time exploring this topic because it really does set my soul on fire and I'm very passionate about it. But I think we could feel a whole lot better in an emotional way if we really started to make those connections and started to improve areas of our physical health, which are going to have an enormous impact on how we feel mentally. Now, my experience as it relates to this has ebbed and flowed over the past probably 6 or 7 years. When I was 22, I went through a pretty intense period of time in my life, and that was also the time that I was able to adopt my fur child, my Lulu. She is going to be 7 this year. And so out of a dark time came a beautiful, beautiful thing, my very best friend. But it was also during this time that I started to use exercise as a coping mechanism, and it evolved into a pretty maladaptive coping mechanism. And it's interesting because using exercise to support your mental health is important, it's valuable, it's transformational. However, it can walk a fine line sometimes. And I, for example, became obsessive with running every single day because it was so helpful for my mood to feel better, but I wasn't honoring my physical body. I wasn't honoring the fact that my joints needed rest, that my muscles needed recovery, and it was a lot of force and stress on my body. So it's interesting because now with my relationship with exercise, I depend on movement as a form of mental health care. I depend on movement to help support my energy, my mood, my focus, and so forth. It's one of my most favorite things. But it can also become something that's very harmful when we maybe overuse it or we depend on it. And this is where I always try to emphasize the need for self-awareness. It's about cultivating an awareness around when exercise does become harmful or toxic. It's about cultivating awareness around when we become too obsessive with healthy eating, otherwise known as orthorexia. It's really about identifying that balance because ultimately that's where we thrive. We are able to feel good, to live a high quality life, to feel better when we operate within a space of balance. And that's truly where it's most sustainable. And so, for my sake, I took it too far to the other side of the spectrum. And to this day, I deal with knee issues because of the fact that I pushed it so much during a time that I was just feeling so terrible and it was so dark for me. And I turned to a coping skill that otherwise would be healthy, but I took it a little bit too far. This topic around lifestyle, nutrition, and wellness as it relates to mental health will be on the forefront of conversations because it's so incredibly important. But I hope that sharing a little bit of my experience and my story helps you feel, number one, not alone, and really helps you feel more empowered in identifying these areas of your life and working towards improving them for the sake of feeling better emotionally. So now we are into my early 20s. I'm drinking more. My sleep schedule is all over the place because at this point I had started bartending more frequently, more consistently. So I'm working at night more often than not. I'm paying no attention to my diet. I am exercising pretty intermittently, pretty infrequently. And I started to have some pretty intense cystic acne. This is hormonal acne that is along the jawline, very painful, very deep. And let me tell you, this was a very challenging part of my life, both physically and mentally. And I was getting sick all the time. My skin was erupting and super, super painful. My mental health was suffering as a result of it, right? Feeling very stressed, very anxious, very insecure about my skin. And I really could not understand why this was happening. At the time, I truly thought I was healthy. I thought I was taking care of myself. This is around the time that I started my Instagram. I was moving into grad school at this point in time to study for my master's degree. And surface level wise, I thought I was doing the right things. I was exercising, I was eating healthy, or so I thought. Why is this happening? Why am I having these symptoms? What is going on? And obviously, in retrospect, I know I was exercising way too hard. I was doing high intensity interval training and really stressing out my body. I wasn't eating properly. I think I was eating textbook healthy, which, involved salads and pretty basic. I had no understanding of macronutrition, micronutrition. I was eating a lot of dairy-free options, which we know are loaded with lots of gums and sweeteners and so forth. I wasn't getting proper sleep. I was drinking a lot more because I had just turned 21 and I was moving, into that phase of life. And I was chronically using antibiotics. I was someone who dealt with sinus infections. Every time the wind would blow, I had a sinus infection. And at the time, I chalked it up to I work at night. I don't get a lot of sleep. I'm around others who have a lot of germs. I am busy. I'm in school full time. I must have some sort of sinus infection issue. And it's funny because my mom did say to me one time, your aunt had a chronic sinus issue. So it sounds to me like you inherited that too. Okay, so I was under the impression that this was going to be something that I live with for the rest of my life. But at the time, that was okay because I had antibiotics. And I had no understanding what these antibiotics were doing to my gut health, to my body. All I knew is as soon as I felt sick in any capacity as it relates to my sinus or respiratory system, I would make an appointment, see my doctor, and get an antibiotic, get a prescription. And this was simply because I didn't have time to be sick. I didn't have time to lay low, to rest, to recover. I had school, I had work, I had things to do, and I didn't have time to be worried about being sick. I have a distinct memory of being with my doctor for probably my third or fourth antibiotic in that year. And he rattled off, well, you were prescribed X in January, you were prescribed Y in March, we had you on Z in May, so let's try and go in this direction. And he prescribed me a different antibiotic. Now, to give you a brief overview of what I mean when I say gut health, for those of you who are not familiar, first and foremost, I'm going to be talking about gut health a lot, simply because, as Hippocrates says, all disease begins in the gut, and our gut health is imperative to overall health. Our gut health is imperative to our skin health, it is imperative to our brain health, our endocrine system, our liver health, our immune health, especially. Our gut health is so important. And at the time, taking these antibiotics for the sake of eradicating the issue was coming from a well-intended place. I obviously didn't know what I was actually doing to my body while taking these antibiotics. However, looking back, I can share with you all what's going on when we're taking antibiotics is it's not only eliminating the pathogen or the bad bacteria that is causing the illness, but it's also eradicating and decimating the good bacteria within our microbiome. And our microbiome is a community of bacteria within the gastrointestinal tract. And it's our job to take care of this part of our health, to take care of our microbiome in order to allow it to flourish and thrive. And that's what allows us to feel good. That's what allows us to have a strong immune system and so forth, right? So to give you the very basics, our gut health is overall health. I will spend another episode going into greater depth about gut health. But when it comes to antibiotic use, if we are not proactive after our use to restore our gut microbiome, to recover our body as a result of taking the antibiotics, which, as we know, is important in certain cases, we can't avoid medication entirely if it's necessary. If we're not given the education and the knowledge to help support recovery after antibiotic use, we are walking down a very difficult path. This path leads us to dysfunction because if our gut health is not taken care of, if we've just completely eradicated our microbiome, what can we expect to happen when it comes to our brain health, when it comes to our immune system, and so forth? So you can imagine that over the course of extensive antibiotic use over the course of many years, you can imagine what state my gut must have been in if I have no understanding of what it means to restore, to repopulate, and to allow my gut to heal. Now, couple this with alcohol use, couple it with a poor diet, couple it with high intensity interval training and lots of stressful workouts, couple it with sleep deprivation and so forth, we have a recipe for disaster. We have a recipe for symptomology and dysfunction, and that is exactly what ensued. I was now more susceptible to illness because if my gut health is poor and I'm not taking care of my gut, 70% of our immune system's in our gut. So I'm taking these antibiotics, hoping that they're going to help me, hoping that they're going to allow me to feel better. And I'm really just making my body more susceptible to illness, more vulnerable to illness because my gut health and my immune health are compromised. And this cycle continued. I'd get sick, I'd go to the doctor, I'd get an antibiotic, my gut would endure the harm that would come from this antibiotic, and I would get sick again and again and again. And now looking back at 29, I rarely get sick, let alone getting a sinus infection, which I'm very lucky and I'm very grateful for. And I know it's because I've completely transformed the way I see health, the way I take care of myself, and so forth. And that includes being very diligent about taking care of my gut health. So at the time, what I thought was poor sinus issues. I thought I had a chronic sinus issue. And in reality, it was simply just the fact that I was not taking care of my gut. I was not taking care of my body in the way that I needed to take care of it, and my body was then more susceptible to illness, which is why I continued to get sick. And not only was I getting sick more frequently, I definitely was not getting restorative quality sleep. Like I said, was drinking much more, which obviously disrupted my sleep quality and impacted my gut microbiome as well. I wasn't eating a high quality diet. I wasn't conscious of toxins and toxic exposure. And overall, my quality of life, while I defined it as being healthful, was less than healthful, was certainly not healthful. And as I mentioned, I was definitely inflamed. And this inflammation was most prominent, most obvious in my skin. I was dealing with the cystic acne, as I mentioned. It was having a lot of influence on my mental health, and I was trying everything under the sun to help support and eradicate my issue. And, that ranged from cutting out dairy, it ranged to cutting out caffeine. I tried birth control for a short period of time. I tried all the topical treatments. I was getting facials. I was trying everything and anything as I Google searched relentlessly to try and find a solution. And what's fascinating is not once did I come across gut health, not once did I come across any bit of information that I know now was a driving force in this issue. Now, it wasn't gut health alone that was a factor here. I'm sure my liver was overburdened, which can manifest as skin issues. I have poor detox pathways, which I learned this year from genetic testing. So I think a combination of poor liver health with already compromised detox pathways definitely played a role in the manifestation of my skin, and then also hormonal concerns. And as we know, all of it's very much connected. But for the sake of this conversation, I encourage you, if you have any kind of skin health issue, acne, eczema, rosacea, any type of skin concern, I encourage you to look underneath the surface, because 9 times out of 10, you are going to find that your skin health issues are a manifestation of something going on underneath the surface, an imbalance, some sort of dysfunction, inflammation. Because after all, acne and skin concern, like I just mentioned, are symptoms of an underlying issue. They are symptoms of some sort of root cause. And like me, a lot of us are spending a lot of time, energy, and money on addressing these issues topically, addressing them on the surface, when in reality, there's something going on underneath. And unfortunately, too, it's likely not going to just stop at these manifestations on our skin. If we are allowing this dysfunction, this inflammation, and so forth to perpetuate, it's going to develop into other issues. It's going to spread into other areas. And so it's really important that we are taking it seriously and we're addressing it at the root, as opposed to just trying to quiet the symptoms on the surface. I want to conclude this episode here for the sake of time, but also so that in the next episode I can really expand a lot on where I went from here. This was such a defining part of my health journey, and it's probably the most significant part in my understanding of how the body works, because it's my firsthand experience. And I hope that it resonates. If you feel that this has been a situation that you've experienced, or you're currently navigating it as it relates to skin health or chronic antibiotic use, or really thinking you're doing all the right things, but you're not addressing what's going on underneath, I am with you. I hear you. I empathize for you because I was there. And what's fascinating is it wasn't until I looked back that I was able to really put all the pieces together. Because over the course of my early 20s into my mid 20s, I otherwise thought I was very healthy. I thought I was eating the right things. I thought I was moving my body properly. And that was really the extent of my knowledge of health, eating right and moving my body. And I never considered sleep or toxin exposure or medication use or gut health or hormone health, any of the above. I never considered any of that. And so it wasn't until I got into my mid to late 20s that my skin healed, that I felt better, that I reduced the inflammation in my body, and I could put the pieces together in understanding why all of this happened, what were the driving forces in the manifestation of these skin issues, and how can I help others along their journey so that they don't have to go through what I went through for as long as I went through in trying everything, or so I thought, and not really seeing any difference. I didn't one day wake up and say, you know what, maybe it's my gut health, maybe it's my antibiotic use. It was not until I spent many years investing in my wellness in a different way that I healed. that I eliminated the frequency of my sinus infections, that my skin cleared, and so forth, that I really recognized, oh my goodness, this is what was happening all along. This is what was causing this. This is the reason why I suffered the way I did for as long as I did. And so now I hope to empower you, even if it's not skin related. Regardless, I hope to empower you in whatever symptoms you're experiencing, whether or not they are subclinical symptoms, which are often symptoms we kind of dismiss, like fatigue, like low energy, like muscle aches, like stomach aches or headaches, migraines, and so forth. Or there may be larger issues, larger symptoms that are more often considered in the Western medicine world. Either way, your experience is valid, and I assure you that there is healing. It's just a matter of how are you putting the pieces together to better understand your history and your current life circumstances and your current lifestyle to then move forward in a way that's more supportive of addressing the dysfunction underneath the surface so that your symptoms can subside. So, come back next week. We are going to be doing part 2 of my story, and I'm going to get into the healing journey that I unknowingly underwent. And then I'm also going to explore how I got into holistic health coaching, talk a little bit more about my experience in the mental health field, and really dive into the past 4 or 5 years of my life. So you could get to know me a little bit more, you could understand where I come from, and hopefully I can empower you and offer you some insight in how you can take control of your health and wellness today. In the meantime, I'm so happy that you're here, and be well.